gigant i den portugisiska världen intill mig här. Och jag ska strax switcha över till engelska, men jag vill presentera honom på svenska. Jag kommer att kalla honom JLBG därför att han heter João Luís Barreto Guimarães. Vi kan ju försöka att vricka tungan till det är lite svårt, men Guimarães kommer vi nog kanske att kalla honom. Han är väldigt stor i Portugal nu för tiden. Han är också cancerläkare, rekonstruktiv kirurg, jobbar med liv och död, snart att så att säga ta folk som har det ganska svårt till ett nytt liv. Det kan synas lite i hans diktning. Så att jag tänker låta honom prata lite engelska. I'm going to switch to English since I presented you. João Luís, could you tell us why the title of this talk is Poetry, Prices and Life? Could you tell us a little bit why poetry? Why not only being a surgeon, a cancer surgeon? Why poetry?
Why not only a cancer surgeon? Mm-hmm. So good morning, thank you for coming. In fact, I wrote my first poetry book before I finished medical school. So probably the question should have been posed the other way around. In the first years, both poetry and medicine didn't mix very much. I began to write more about life other than what happens with my patients or what happened in the hospital. Not too much poems about diseases. My poetry has always been about what I saw on the streets, what I heard people talking in cafes, coffee shops, about real life, about things that happened in front of my eyes, that I sensed that they have some kind of other meaning, the absurd, the things that I figured that I could write about, starting sometimes with an object and ending writing about great themes of our metaphysical life. But then, as the years went by, obviously it's not possible to be two persons when you are a doctor and a writer. They are always mixing, and there's no sense in dividing one thing from another.
You're also, if I may ask, you're also a teacher at the medical school in Porto.
Yeah, that's probably the apex of the situation, the path that I'm describing. Because jumping forward in this narrative, nowadays I was invited to teach poetry to medical students in the medical facility where I had my graduation, and it's a whole discipline with 14 lessons, 28 hours of in the second year of medicine, where I talk with my students about poems, where they can feel and hear someone talking to the paper in a similar situation that they will find in the future when they will be doctors, sitting in a consultation room with a patient. with a future patient. And there's some kind of empathy and learning in this peculiar situation, because they can hear voices, they can contact personas avant la lettre, people that sat down and wrote in a paper what was in their heart, like you can say like a window to the soul.
Exactly.
Isolated probably, with no one watching. And some poems, if you choose them wisely, can be a very similar situation of what they can find and contact later on in their lives. So I have, last week I started the 5th year, so it has been a great success and very popular among the medical students that didn't choose humanistics, but they still want to connect to that part of the human experience.
And we could maybe read something also. I have one particular poem that I like a lot, talking about this flaneur life of yours. You actually wrote a poem that I borrowed from another book when you and your wife was visiting Stockholm. And this is a poem that I included. I might read it just in Swedish for the public to appreciate. Protest på Strömgatan. På Strömgatan framför Kungliga slottet såg vi hur det fiskades lax. 2 magnifika fiskar glittrade på Norrströms kaj, där Mälaren möter Östersjön. Vi lät oss imponeras över tålamodet hos dessa fiskande män under en isande himmel mitt i Stockholms hjärta. Men inte ens nordanvinden som kylde våra kinder kunde bli ett hinder för en spännande epilog. Vi hade ju prövat laxen till frukost. Och inga negativa grader kunde avskräcka oss från att stanna kvar och hålla tummarna för att de fina fiskarna skulle fly. Lite flanör in Stockholm. You have another one that you flanate around in Italy. It's a poetry that is easy to understand and that you recognize yourself even as a Swede. I got so amazed about this poem about Stockholm. I hope that you will have a poem about Göteborg. You've been to Fiskekyrka, to the fish market the other day. I bet you're going to write something about that. Do you think so?
It's possible, because my poetry is there's this first skin of the poem that you think that I'm only talking about quotidian objects and this first layer of reality that you see around. But then what I want to do is to find the historical meaning or the memory strata that hides behind things and hides behind places. And sometimes that doesn't happen when I'm on the places themselves. No, they resonate in my memory, and sometimes I read about them later on. I want to know what lives or whose lives lived there. If it was a poet, even better. And then there's always a first verse that it's given.
Yeah.
And I have to quickly write it down, otherwise it flies away. It really disappears, and if it disappears and I try to catch it like 5 seconds later,
It's not there.
It's not there. There's this angst
Exactly.
trying to catch it, but it really isn't there. So you have to carry something with you, a notebook so you can write it down immediately, one verse, and if you are lucky, you write more than one verse. And then there's this other situation, which for me always happens, not in the mornings but in the afternoons. Sometimes not at home but in coffee shops with lots of noise around, where I go through this book and I'm working not the situation itself but the language that I created about the situation. So I'm not creating the reality but some kind of transfiguration of that reality through the memory of what is written. And in that situation I'm working with language.
Very much so.
I'm working with language, and that's what really happened. I find interesting is how you can convey with language your vision of the world, your witness of being here. The ethical perspective of a human being that doesn't only cross the streets and the places and the houses and the cities, but thinks about those places as a human experience. So this has a lot to do with the biography of the poet, and in that way, obviously, it's Flannery.
Yes. Well, we are amongst my stand is just amongst the different great Swedish poets and writers. Why do you think you're so popular now in Portugal? Because I know you're very humble and you don't want to talk about sales and things like that. But what catches the reader, do you think? So they want to buy this little your poetry. I mean, poetry is not something that you sort of sell lots of. You have got prices. Is that something?
To answer that question, you have to excuse that I talk about myself.
No.
Because in the 60s and in the 70s in Portugal, poetry began to talk about itself. Poems about poems, and words about words, and language about language. And what happened with my generation in particular is that we began to talk about ourselves and yourselves. We began to talk again about life, and not about poetry, and not about literature, and not about the words. Meaning that in the 60s, the poets were mainly interested in the sound that each word in Portuguese has. And in Portuguese, the words are made of little syllables. So this is a glass, and we call it copo, a consonant and a vowel. And the musical notes are also made of syllables. We call it do, re, mi, fa, sol. It's a consonant and a vowel. So it's very easy in Portuguese, and you see that in Brazilian poetry, to make poems that are more interested in the music of the words than in the meaning of the words, because each word has in its tonical syllable a musical note that is similar to the musical do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. And what happens when you are only concerned with music is that you connect to very beautiful sounds and very beautiful words, but when they are put together in a verse, they may not mean nothing, just the sound that they have. And the poetry in Portugal in the 60s and the 50s and the beginning of the 70s was a poetry that was very good when we listened to it, but it meant nothing. It meant nothing for the new generations. So you can't find that poetry translated in other languages, because when you translate, that music is gone. And when these generations in the 70s and the 80s came, we were more concerned with the image that each word carries. Its denotation, its connotation, the symbology, the figures of style, and of course we chose the words because they have an euphony, not a cacophony. Okay? So when we begin with a glass which is very concrete, and end talking about thirst, which is very abstract, but we look at this, the meaning of the word and the sound of the word. This made people, readers, can reach again for poetry. So the generation which began in the end of the 80s and went all the way the 90s and 2000 was rather successful in being read.
I'm going to.
And then things like originality and other characteristics made their way through.
I'm going to let you think for a little while. We have 5 or less 6 minutes left. I'm going to read about that thirst of yours, the water's name. Vattnets namn, märk väl hur till och med vattnet förändrar sig, och då menar jag inte bara spott, svett och tårar. Jag menar det där svarta molnet som håller vattnet i regnet som faller och i svackan som vi kallar flod. Runt bergen där blir den till is. Märk väl hur det ständigt klär sig i olika namn, och även du kan vara många. För du har bara ett liv. Du kan bli det du vill. Märk hur själva vattnet, även när det är frånvarande, inte är utan namn. För i sin frånvaro heter vattnet törst. Written to your daughter on her birthday. Det är så många vackra dikter så jag bara vill läsa dem högt. There are so many beautiful poems that I really like to read read out loud. But you had one particular poem that you wanted us to read together.
Yeah.
And that is another side of yours. I mean, we're talking about the flaneur, we're talking about the dedications, and you have talked about the syllabus that you use, because you started writing sonnets in the beginning. Rather intranslatable, I'm sorry. It's very difficult anyway. And now I'm so happy that I sort of can catch your voice in Swedish into this syllable. Well, there are lots of syllables even in Swedish. We have all those vowels that we can sing on a little bit. But there is another side of yours that is the political side, and very serious side. And I think every poem in this book has a little twist in it. And I think shall we read? You read it in Portuguese and I read it in Swedish.
This is a small poem about daily acts that we perform to restore some order in the chaotic world. And it's a poem I wrote about finding clarity in routine, arranging the everyday, imagining a measure of justice and balance in life. I shall read it in Portuguese.
Yes, read it in Portuguese first.
Pelo fim do dia, disponho os talheres na máquina, alinhando lado a lado objetos semelhantes. À frente, exaustos, os garfos. A meio, em concha, as colheres. Atrás, contidas, as facas. Com esta inquietação, devolvo pelo fim do dia alguma ordem ao mundo. Tufões por ordem alfabética, os corruptos na cadeia, 2 estados na Terra Santa.
I slutet av dagen. Jag ordnar verktygen i en väloljad maskin. Sida vid sida, likadana föremål. Framför mig de väl använda gafflarna. Mitt i liggandes intill varandra skedarna. Längst bak knivarna. Med denna rutin återskapar jag i slutet av dagen en ordning till världen. Med orkaner i alfabetisk ordning så kan vi låsa in dem som korrumperar. 2 stater i det heliga landet. We are about to, well, we have 2 minutes. I wonder if there is any questions. Maybe it's difficult to pose a question to such a great poet. I would say like this book, I'm so happy to say this. I'm going to say that you're translated into so many languages. I don't know how many. How many are there? You don't even know yourself. It's in the end of the book. There is lots of translations. But now this book, this precise book called Claridad in Portuguese, is about to be published in Greece. And of course it's very Greek. The only thing that I I don't know Greek, but I know a lot of the philosophy of the Greeks, as you probably all know. And I thought about that all the time when I translated. This is so Greek, this is so much sea, this is so much air in the poems. And now the Claridad was published in Portugal last year, a year ago, and now it's in Swedish, and it's going to Greenland, or to Greece. I mean, Greenland. That's. Do you have anything to say about that? Why do you think that the Greeks love it so much?
Funny enough, the next book that we are going to translate to Swedish, which is called Mediterranean, was the first one published in Greece. I think there's an evolution of the author's voice that it's very. I think the translators are jumping the sequence of the books, and they want to have the more actual voice, the voice that it's more political, I think, more ethical and more up to date with what's happening in the world, what's happening in Europe.
Yes.
Probably they think that their readers in their own countries will feel that it's more just for their situation. So
and understandable
in
one way.
I really don't mind that they jump from one book. There are countries, for instance, in Egypt, in Arab, they are doing the sequence very much as it came in Portugal, and in Italy also. 4 books in Egypt and 5 books in Italy. But I really don't mind that they jump, because for me it's all my books are only one book. So they can choose like chapters of it, which are each one of these little ones.
I'm afraid we have to stop now because someone else is going. But this is so nice, and you will find João, JLBG, on the Författarförbundets stage. You can sign books if people are interested.
Okay.
And I would thank you so much for coming all the way from Porto,
Thank you.
just to be here with us, first time in Sweden, in the Göteborg fair. He will come back in a month's time to Författarförbundet. So if you're interested, try to check their home site. Thank you so much, Ron.